The wedding band stopped mid-song when Derek grabbed the microphone, his face red with champagne and arrogance. 200 guests turned to watch as he pointed at me, demanding I hand over my farm keys right there at my daughter Sarah's reception. When I quietly refused, his palm cracked across my face with such force that I stumbled backward into the wedding cake table. Blood trickled from my split lip as I straightened my tie, walked calmly to the parking lot, and made one phone call that would change everything. 6 months before that nightmare of a wedding reception, I was sitting on my front porch, watching the Nebraska sunset paint the wheat fields gold, when Sarah's car kicked up dust down our long driveway. My daughter had called earlier, her voice bubbling with excitement about bringing someone special to meet me. At 68, I'd learned to read the weather in clouds and the truth in people's eyes, and something in her tone made me set down my coffee with extra care. Sarah bounded up the porch steps, like she had when she was 12, her veterinary scrubs still dusty from a day at the clinic. Behind her, stepping out of a pristine BMW that looked absurdly out of place next to my mud-splattered pickup, was Derek Hartwell. Everything about him screamed money, from his perfectly styled hair to his Italian leather shoes that he grimaced at when they touched our gravel. "Dad, this is Derek." Sarah announced, her eyes shining with that dangerous light I recognized from when she'd brought home injured animals as a child, convinced she could save them all. Derek strode forward with practiced confidence, his handshake firm, and his smile straight from a toothpaste commercial. "Mr. Wakefield, I've heard so much about you. Sarah speaks of nothing but this magnificent farm and her incredible father." I nodded, noting how his eyes swept across my land with the calculating gaze of an appraiser rather than an admirer. "Call me Clinton. Welcome to our home." Over the following weeks, Derek launched what I can only describe as a charm offensive. He arrived bearing gifts that felt more like bribes than gestures of kindness. Expensive bourbon for me, designer jewelry for Sarah Gourmet, food baskets that sat unopened in my pantry because I preferred my own cooking. He insisted on helping with farm work, though his manicured hands fumbled with even basic tools, and his questions about crop yields and land values felt more like an interrogation than friendly interest. "You know Clinton," he said one afternoon, pretending to examine our combine harvester while actually typing numbers into his phone. "With modern agricultural investment strategies, this operation could triple its profit margins. I have connections in commodity futures. Who would kill for a partnership with established farmland like yours?" I kept my voice steady while tightening a bolt he'd loosened. "This land's been in my family for 4 generations. It's not about margins. It's about legacy." His laugh had an edge sharp enough to cut wire. Of course. I'm just thinking about Sarah's future. Our future." Sarah was already lost to his spell. When I tried to share my concerns over our weekly dinner at the town diner, she brushed them off like cobwebs. "Dad, you don't understand. Derek's from a different world. The Hartwells own half of Connecticut. He could have anyone, but he chose me. He sees past this small-town stuff." "Sweetheart, there's nothing wrong with small-town stuff. Your mother and I built a good life here." Her face softened at the mention of her late mother, but Derek had done his work well. "Mom would want me to be happy. Derek makes me happy." I might have left it at that, attributed my unease to an old widower's protectiveness, if not for running into Earl Morrison at the feed store. Earl had worked at First National Bank for 40 years before retiring, and his memory for faces was legendary. "That boyfriend of Sarah's," Earl mentioned while loading chicken feed into my truck. I knew I recognized him. Saw his name on some paperwork few years back. Can't quite place it, but it wasn't good news. That night, I made some calls. Army buddies, old friends scattered across the country, people who knew people. What I found made my blood run cold. Derek Hartwell had filed for bankruptcy 3 years ago, listing massive gambling debts. The filing was mysteriously withdrawn 2 weeks later, right around the time he'd started dating Jennifer Buchanan, daughter of a wealthy Texas rancher. Jennifer's father had died 6 months into their relationship. Tractor accident, they said. The ranch was sold within a year. Jennifer disappeared soon after, and Derek emerged debt-free with a new name variation and a trail that led to Connecticut, where he'd reinvented himself. I sat in my study until dawn, staring at the printed pages, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with rage. This predator was stalking my daughter, and I'd be damned if I'd let history repeat itself on my watch. But I knew Sarah wouldn't believe mere suspicion. I needed proof, and I needed to be smarter than Derek suspected an old farmer could be. The next morning, I smiled at Derek over breakfast, discussed grain futures, and even laughed at his condescending jokes about rural life. But while he thought he was playing me, I'd already begun my own game. One thing my military service taught me: the best defense is a carefully planned offense. And Derek Hartwell had just declared war on the wrong family. 3 months before the wedding, Derek sat across from me in my living room, his face arranged in an expression of wounded nobility that might have fooled someone who hadn't seen true sacrifice. Sarah perched beside him on my late wife's favorite sofa, her hand clasped in his like a shackle disguised as affection. "Clinton, I want you to know that I've told Sarah we don't need a prenuptial agreement," Derek announced, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "When you truly love someone, you don't plan for failure. Everything I have is hers, and everything she has is mine. That's what marriage means." I sipped my coffee slowly, watching his performance. "That's mighty generous of you, Derek. Though I imagine your family's lawyers might have different thoughts on protecting the Hartwell assets." A flash of something dark crossed his features before he recovered. "My family trusts my judgment. Besides, what matters is building a future together, not dividing assets we haven't even created yet." Over the following days, Derek's interest in the farm intensified. He'd appear at odd hours, claiming he wanted to understand the business that would someday be part of his children's heritage. His questions grew increasingly specific, focusing on mineral rights, water access, development potential. "You know Clinton," he mentioned one morning while I repaired a fence line. "I had a surveyor friend look at some public records. Did you realize you're sitting on some of the richest agricultural land in Nebraska? With the right approach, this could be worth far more than just farming." I hammered in another staple, keeping my expression neutral. "Land's worth what it grows. Always has been. But the mineral rights alone must be worth millions. Have you ever had them properly assessed?" That afternoon, I drove to Lincoln to meet with Harold Brennan, my family's lawyer for 30 years. Harold's office smelled of leather and old paper, a comforting contrast to Derek's world of digital speculation and quick profits. "Clinton, I need to tell you something," Harold said after pleasantries were exchanged. "There have been inquiries about your property. Subtle ones through third parties, but persistent. Someone's been doing deep research into your holdings." "What did they find?" Harold pulled out a thick folder. "What I've kept very quiet for years, per your father's instructions. The geological surveys done in the 80s show significant natural gas deposits under your eastern sections. With current extraction technology and prices, we're talking about $8 million in potential value, maybe more." I felt the pieces clicking into place. "Who else knows about this?" "Officially, just you, me, and the sealed survey records. But someone with the right connections and enough money could piece it together from public data." That evening, I installed motion sensors around my home office, a precaution that proved prescient when they triggered at 2 a.m. 5 days later. I found Derek in my study, his phone's camera light illuminating financial documents I deliberately left accessible. He jumped when I flipped on the overhead light. "Derek, what are you doing?" His recovery was swift. I'll give him that. I couldn't sleep, thought I heard something. The door was open, and I saw papers scattered. I was just making sure everything was okay. At 2 a.m, in my private office. "Sarah was worried. She's been having nightmares about break-ins. I didn't want to wake you." His lie rolled out smooth as aged whiskey, poisonous as antifreeze. I played along, thanking him for his concern. But that night, I moved every important document to a safety deposit box and installed cameras that fed directly to my phone. What they captured over the next weeks would have been comedic if it weren't so sinister. Derek photographing mail testing drawer locks, even attempting to access my computer. The worst revelation came when Sarah announced her pregnancy. Her joy was genuine, but Derek's reaction was calculating. Within days, he was suggesting she leave her veterinary practice. "You need to think about our baby," he insisted over dinner. "All those large animals, the chemicals, the stress. Your father would agree that family comes first. Right, Clinton?" Sarah looked torn, her hand protective over her still flat stomach. "But I love my work. Dr. Peterson said I could continue with modifications." "Dr. Peterson doesn't love you like I do." Derek countered, his tone shifting to wounded concern. "I just want what's best for our family." That night, I made a decision that went against every honest bone in my body. I hired a private investigator, paying cash to a former detective from Omaha, with a reputation for discretion. James Carpenter was a grizzled veteran who listened to my concerns without judgment. "I'll need a few weeks," he said, pocketing my retainer. "But if there's dirt, I'll find it." Meanwhile, Derek's control over Sarah tightened like a noose. She stopped meeting friends for lunch, claiming Derek needed her help with wedding planning. Her phone calls to me grew shorter, often ending abruptly when Derek entered the room. When I visited, I noticed she'd lost weight, despite the pregnancy, her eyes darting to Derek before answering even simple questions. The investigation's first report arrived like a gut punch. Derek had been married twice, before both times to women with family money. The first wife, Patricia Morse, daughter of a shopping mall developer, had died in a boating accident 2 years into their marriage. Her fortune evaporated in bad investments Derek managed. The second, Angela Chen, survived, but lost her family's restaurant chain to bankruptcy after signing power of attorney during a difficult pregnancy. "There's more," Carpenter told me during a clandestine meeting at a truck stop. Both women reported feeling confused and disoriented during their relationships. Angela mentioned memory gaps, sudden mood changes. She thinks she was being drugged, but could never prove it. The final piece fell into place when I noticed Sarah's prenatal vitamins. The bottle was from Derek's pharmacy connection, not her obstetrician. I pocketed a few pills and had them analyzed by a veterinary lab under the pretense of checking livestock supplements. The results confirmed my worst fears: therapeutic doses of benzodiazepine mixed with the vitamins, enough to create dependence and compliance without obvious impairment. I stood in my barn that night, fists clenched, fighting the urge to confront Derek directly. But rage wouldn't save Sarah. Strategy would. If I moved too soon, she'd defend him, choose him, and I'd lose any chance to protect her. I needed to let Derek's arrogance lead him to overplay his hand, and I needed to be ready when he did. The web was closing around my daughter, but the spider didn't realize he'd wandered into a farmer's field. And this farmer had faced down bigger predators than Derek Hartwell. It was time to start preparing my own trap. 8 weeks before the wedding, Derek unveiled his vision for what he called the social event of the season. We sat in my kitchen as he spread glossy magazines and printed Pinterest pages across the worn wooden table where 3 generations of Wakefields had shared their meals. "Clinton, I know Sarah grew up simply," he began, his tone suggesting this was a deficiency to be corrected, "but the Hartwell name carries certain expectations. We're thinking 400 guests, tented reception on the farm's South Meadow. Full catering from Omaha's finest, perhaps even fly in that chef from Chicago," Sarah mentioned, loving. I watched the numbers he casually threw around. Venue preparation $15,000, catering $60,000, flowers $20,000. The list grew like a cancer. "That's quite an undertaking," I said carefully. Sarah always talked about a small ceremony, family, and close friends. Derek's smile turned predatory. That was before she understood what she was marrying into. "Don't worry, I'm not expecting you to cover everything. Just the traditional father's portions. Unless that's a problem." The challenge in his voice was clear. Refuse and appear cheap, uncaring about his daughter's happiness. Agree, and hemorrhage money he'd already calculated I could afford based on his snooping. "No problem at all," I replied. "Sarah deserves the best." His satisfaction was nauseating. What he didn't know was that I'd already met with Harold Brennan to restructure my finances. Every acre, every building, every piece of equipment was being transferred to an irrevocable trust, with Sarah as beneficiary, but with ironclad protection against spousal access. It was costing me thousands in legal fees, but it would be worth it. The strange incident started 3 weeks later. First, the brake lines on my tractor were cut. I discovered it during my routine morning check, a habit that saved my life. The cut was clean, professional, not the work of random vandalism. Probably teenagers, Sheriff Thompson suggested when he responded to my call. Been having trouble with them over in Millerville too. I didn't argue, but I started checking every piece of equipment before use. Good thing too. The chain on my chainsaw had been deliberately weakened, set to snap under pressure. A loose board appeared over the old well covered with hay. Small accidents waiting to happen, each potentially fatal for a man my age working alone. Then came the fire. I woke at 3 a.m. to the smell of smoke, found the south corner of my equipment barn ablaze. The fire department saved most of the structure, but the investigator found traces of accelerant. Derek arrived while the firefighters were still mopping up his concern, as fake as his sympathy. My God. Clinton, are you all right? Sarah's beside herself. Maybe you should consider scaling back operations, bringing in some help. A man your age shouldn't be dealing with such stress alone. I've been managing this farm since before you were born, I reminded him. I'll manage it long after you're gone. Something flickered in his eyes at that. Of course. I just meant we're family now. Your burdens are our burdens. The next day, I found him showing 2 men around the property. They wore city clothes and carried tablet computers, photographing everything and making notes. Derek, who are these gentlemen? He didn't even look embarrassed. Investment consultants, friends from New York. They were curious about agricultural opportunities. I thought showing them a real working farm would be educational. And you thought my property was yours to show? Clinton, we're going to be family. What's the harm in letting colleagues see where Sarah grew up? I recognized one of the men from my online research, Marcus Webb, a development specialist known for converting farmland into suburban sprawl. They weren't just photographing. They were appraising. That night, I installed hidden cameras throughout the house and barn military-grade equipment I'd sourced through old contacts. What they captured over the next 2 weeks made my blood boil. Derek entering my home with copied keys, searching through drawers, attempting to access my safe. He brought different people to survey the land always, when he thought I was gone. The most disturbing footage showed him in Sarah's room, adding pills to her water bottle from an unmarked container. I had the water tested, more benzodiazepines, higher doses than before. My daughter was being systematically drugged in her childhood home. I wanted to kill him. The thought came unbidden, but persistent. It would be easy. Farm accidents happened all the time. But that wasn't justice, and it wouldn't save Sarah. She'd mourn him, blame herself, never know the truth. I needed him to reveal himself completely and undeniably. I started my counteroffensive by playing weak. I complained of fatigue, forgot conversations, let Derek see me taking heart medication. I mentioned retirement, maybe moving to a senior community, letting younger hands manage the farm. His excitement was palpable. You know, Clinton, if you ever do decide to step back, Sarah and I would be honored to carry on the family tradition. With my business acumen and her local knowledge, we could really make something special here. Maybe you're right, I sighed, adding a tremor to my hand as I reached for my coffee. Maybe it's time. Behind the scenes, I was anything but weak. The cameras captured everything. I recorded our conversations. I documented Sarah's deteriorating condition, the way she'd stare blankly during conversations, her unexplained emotional swings. I gathered medical records, financial transfers, construction permits Derek had inquired about for developments on my land. Most importantly, I reached out to Marcus Steele, my former Special Forces commander, who now ran a high-end security firm. We'd saved each other's lives more times than I could count in Vietnam, and when I explained the situation, His response was immediate. "How do you want to play it, Clinton?" "I want him exposed, ruined, and imprisoned. But most importantly, I want Sarah safe." "Then, we do this right. Document everything, build an airtight case, and when he makes his move, we'll be ready." "What's your timeline?" "He's getting desperate. I give him until the wedding before he does something dramatic. Then that's when we spring the trap. I'll have my team in position. You just keep playing the weak old man." As the wedding approached, Derek's mask slipped more frequently. He snapped at vendors who questioned his extravagant demands. He berated Sarah for gaining insufficient pregnancy weight, suggesting her wedding dress would look common. He even tried to convince her that I was showing signs of dementia, positioning himself as the responsible party who should manage family affairs. I watched it all, documented it all, and waited. The hardest part was seeing Sarah's confusion and pain, knowing I couldn't comfort her yet without tipping my hand. But every cruel word from Derek, every manipulative action, was another nail in his coffin. The night before the wedding, I made final preparations. Hidden cameras were positioned throughout the reception venue. Marcus's team was briefed and ready. Local law enforcement had been discreetly informed to be on standby. And in my jacket pocket, I carried a recording device that would capture whatever grand play Derek had planned. As I stood in my bedroom adjusting the tie Sarah had given me last Christmas, I looked at the photo of my late wife on the dresser. "I'll protect her, Mary," I whispered. "I promise." Tomorrow, Derek Hartwell would make his move. And when he did, he'd learn that some old farmers had fought wars before they'd ever planted seeds. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the rat to take the bait. The morning of Sarah's wedding dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect September days that made Nebraska look like a painting. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the rental crews transform our South Meadow into Derek's vision of elegance. White tents billowed like sails, crystal chandeliers hung from temporary rigging, and enough flowers to stock a funeral home for a year turned my farm into something unrecognizable. I dressed carefully, checking that my recording device was properly concealed and functioning. In the inside pocket of my jacket, I carried a simple letter I'd written to Sarah the night before, explaining everything, just in case something went wrong. Marcus Steele had positioned his team throughout the venue as wedding photographers, videographers, and guests. We were ready for whatever Derek planned. Sarah looked radiant when I knocked on her childhood bedroom door, though I could see the strain beneath her professional makeup. Her wedding dress, a simple, elegant design she'd chosen before Derek's influence, hung perfectly on her too thin frame. "You look beautiful, sweetheart, just like your mother on our wedding day." "Oh, Dad, don't make me cry. This makeup cost more than my first car." Her laugh was forced brittle. "Derek wants everything perfect." "Are you happy?" I asked, taking her hands. They trembled slightly, whether from nerves or the drugs in her system I couldn't tell. "Of course I'm happy. Why wouldn't I be happy? Derek's wonderful, the wedding's beautiful. We're starting a family." The words tumbled out like a rehearsed speech. "I just wish Mom were here." "She is, baby, she is." The ceremony itself was a study in contrasts. Our small country church was packed with 400 guests, most of whom I'd never seen before. Derek's side overflowed with what he called family and business associates, though I'd discovered through Marcus's research that many were actors hired to fill seats and impress the locals. The Hartwell family fortune, Derek claimed, a fiction built on forged documents and confident lies. Reverend Mills performed the service with his usual grace, though I caught him frowning at Derek's impatient foot-tapping during the prayers. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, I had to grip my pew to keep from standing. Not yet. Let him think he'd won. The reception began as a showcase of excess. The catering staff, flown in from Chicago as Derek had demanded, served course after course of food most of our farming community guests didn't recognize. Derek held court at the head table, regaling anyone who'd listen with stories of international business deals and inherited wealth, while Sarah sat beside him like a beautiful ghost, smiling when prompted. I mingled carefully, playing the proud but overwhelmed father. Several neighbors pulled me aside with concerns. "Clinton, you all right with all this?" Ed Foster asked, gesturing at the spectacle. "This ain't like you." "It's what Sarah wants," I replied loud enough for Derek's associates to hear. What kind of father would I be to deny her? Derek's family treated me with barely concealed contempt. His supposed mother, a sharp-faced woman dripping in jewelry, cornered me near the dessert table. "How quaint that Sarah wanted the reception here," she drawled. Derek tried to convince her to use our country club, but she insisted on this rustic charm. "We're simple people, Mrs. Hartwell. This farm's been good enough for 4 generations." Her smile could have curdled milk. "Yes, well, things change, don't they? Derek has such plans for modernizing operations here." As the evening progressed, Derek's drinking increased. Champagne whiskey, more champagne. His face flushed. His gestures became more aggressive, his voice louder. I watched him corner various guests, pointing at the land beyond the tents, making sweeping gestures about development and profits. The moment came during the traditional toasts. Derek had just finished a rambling speech about destiny and fortune when he grabbed the microphone again. The band stopped mid-setup for their next song. The tent fell silent. "And now," Derek announced, swaying slightly, "I want to talk about family legacy." He turned to me, his eyes glittering with triumph and alcohol. "Clinton, my new father, you've built something here. Something valuable. Something that needs younger hands to guide it into the future." I remained seated, my hand steady on my water glass. "So I think it's time," he continued, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Time for you to pass the torch, to recognize that Sarah and I are ready to take responsibility for this place." He walked toward me, each step deliberate despite his intoxication. 200 faces turned to watch. Sarah half rose from her chair, confusion clear on her face. "Clinton," Derek said now, standing directly in front of me, "I want you to give me the keys to the farm. Right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses. Show everyone that you trust your daughter's future to her husband." "Derek." Sarah's voice was weak, uncertain. "What are you doing?" "I'm securing our future, darling. Your father understands. Don't you, Clinton?" I stood slowly, feeling every eye in the tent on me. "Derek, this is hardly the time or place for business discussions." His face darkened. "This isn't business. This is family. Unless you don't think I'm good enough for your family." "That's not what I said." "Then give me the keys." His voice rose aggressive now. "Give me the keys to the house. The equipment sheds everything. Show everyone here that you accept me as your son." I met his bloodshot eyes steadily. "No." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Derek's face contorted with rage. "What did you say?" I said no. This is my farm. It will remain my farm. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Derek's hand came up and cracked across my face with enough force to split my lip and send me stumbling backward into the elaborate wedding cake table. The cake toppled, covering the ground in white frosting and sugar flowers. Gasps echoed through the tent. Someone screamed, probably Sarah. I straightened, slowly tasting blood, aware of Marcus's team shifting positions around the tent. I pulled out my handkerchief, dabbed at my mouth, and looked Derek in the eye. "I'll be leaving now," I said calmly. "You've shown everyone exactly who you are." I walked through the crowd, which parted like a wheat field in the wind. Behind me, Derek's voice rose in angry protests, but I didn't look back. In the parking lot, I pulled out my phone and made a call. Not to my lawyer, as Derek would assume. Not to the police, though they were already on alert. I called the one person whose arrival would destroy Derek's carefully constructed world. "Mrs. Chen, this is Clinton Wakefield. I think it's time you came to collect what's owed to you." Through the security cameras I'd had installed in the parking area, I watched Derek storm out of the tent 20 minutes later, his face purple with rage. He stopped dead when he saw who was stepping out of the black town car that had just arrived. Angela Chen, his second wife, the one who'd survived. And, with her, Patricia Morse's brother, whom Derek believed had died in a car accident 5 years ago. Behind them, 2 FBI agents I'd been cooperating with for the past 6 weeks. Even from across the parking lot, I could hear Derek's strangled gasp. His elaborate house of cards hadn't just fallen, it had burst into flames. And we were just getting started. The wedding reception collapsed into chaos after I left. Through the surveillance feeds on my phone, I watched Derek's rage transform into something closer to panic as he recognized the figures approaching the tent. He barked orders at Sarah to pack, screamed at guests who tried to calm him, and even shoved Reverend Mills when the elderly minister suggested everyone take a moment to pray. I drove to the command post Marcus had established in an abandoned barn 5 miles from my property. His team had converted the space into a high-tech surveillance center monitors, showing feeds from every angle of my farm and the reception venue. "He's losing it," Marcus observed, pointing to a screen where Derek was now berating Sarah for crying. "Want me to move in?" "Not yet. Let him dig his hole deeper. Is everything else ready?" "Federal marshals are standing by. Judge Harrison signed the warrant based on your evidence. We can move whenever you say." Let's see what he does when he realizes I'm not coming back. Derek's first move was predictable. Within 2 hours of the reception's premature end, he dragged a bewildered Sarah to my farmhouse and attempted to take possession. The security system I'd installed captured him trying every key on his stolen set, growing more frustrated when none worked. I'd changed all the locks that morning. "Break a window." He snarled at 2 of his associates who'd followed them. "This is my wife's property. We have every right." "Derek, please." Sarah's voice was small, confused. "Let's just go to the hotel. We can sort this out tomorrow." "Shut up!" He whirled on her with such venom that even his hired muscle stepped back. "Your father humiliated me. U.S. He's probably gone senile. We need to secure the property before he does something stupid." They broke in through the kitchen window. Derek immediately went to my office, tearing through drawers searching for documents that were safely in my deposit box. His frustration grew with each empty folder. Sarah sat in the living room still in her wedding dress, staring at nothing. The drugs in her system were wearing off, and confusion was giving way to something else. She pulled out her phone, tried to call me. I didn't answer. Not yet. By dawn, Derek had transformed my home into a command center for his delusions. He'd called a locksmith to change the locks again, posted his associates as guards, and was on the phone with someone about expedited power of attorney paperwork. "I don't care what time it is," he shouted into his phone. "Find a judge who'll declare him incompetent. He assaulted me at my own wedding. There are 200 witnesses." What Derek didn't know was that those witnesses were already being interviewed by federal agents. His hired actors were singing like canaries, eager to distance themselves from what they now realized was a major criminal enterprise. The real revelation was coming from Angela Chen and Patricia Morse's brother, who'd spent the night providing detailed testimony about Derek's previous schemes. Angela had brought documentation I hadn't even hoped for recordings she'd made of Derek discussing his plans. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, even medical records proving she'd been systematically drugged. Patricia's brother had spent years investigating his sister's death, accumulating evidence of foul play the local police had ignored. The 48-hour mark came at sunset on Monday. I watched through surveillance as Derek grew increasingly erratic. He'd stopped letting Sarah leave the house, claiming it was for her safety. He disconnected the landline and confiscated her cell phone after catching her trying to call her friends. The manipulation was complete. He'd isolated her entirely. "Boss," Marcus said, pointing to a monitor. "We've got movement." 3 black SUVs were approaching the farm, followed by 2 sheriff's department cruisers and an ambulance. The federal marshals had decided to move. Derek saw them coming. Through the cameras, I watched his face cycle through denial, rage, and finally, naked fear. He grabbed Sarah's arm, dragging her toward the back door. "We're leaving, now." "Derek, what's happening? Who are those people?" "Your father happened. Your crazy, vindictive father. But I've got plans for him." They made it to Derek's BMW before the marshals cut off his escape route. I'd given them the location of his planned destination, a private airstrip 20 miles away, where a chartered plane waited paid for, with money he'd stolen from Sarah's accounts that morning. The arrest was almost anticlimactic. Derek tried to run, made it about 50 yards before a marshal tackled him into a muddy field. His screams of outrage echoed across the farmland as they cuffed him. His expensive suit ruined his dignity in tatters. "This is a mistake. I want my lawyer, Clinton Wakefield, set me up. He's senile. He assaulted me." Sarah stood by the car, swaying slightly, watching her new husband being dragged away. A female agent approached her gently, and I saw my daughter collapse into the woman's arms, sobbing. It was time for me to go home. I arrived to find my farm swarming with law enforcement. Derek was in the back of a marshal's car, his face pressed against the window, eyes wild as he saw me approaching. He screamed something I couldn't hear through the glass. Sarah was sitting in the back of the ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders, paramedics checking her vitals. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, I saw confusion, hurt, and betrayal war across her face. "Dad!" "I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now." "I don't understand. Derek said you attacked him. He said you were trying to steal our future." I sat beside her, pulling out the letter I'd written. "Read this when you're ready. Everything's in there. But first, we need to get you to the hospital." "The hospital, Dad. I'm fine. I'm just tired and confused." The lead marshal, Agent Martinez, approached with a grim expression. "Mr. Wakefield, we need to inform you that our preliminary tests show your daughter's been exposed to controlled substances without her knowledge. She needs medical evaluation." Sarah's eyes widened. "What? No, that's impossible. I only took my prenatal vitamins." "Supplied by Derek," I said gently. "Sarah, he's been drugging you. That's why you felt so confused, so tired. That's why you can't remember things clearly." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Her hand went to her stomach, her face paling. "The baby. Oh God, what did he do to my baby?" The next hours were a blur of hospital rooms and tests. The drugs in Sarah's system were identified and documented. The stress and substances had indeed affected her pregnancy, though the doctors were optimistic with proper treatment. I held her hand as she processed each piece of information, watching my strong daughter crumble and rebuild herself with each passing hour. "He never loved me," she whispered at 3 a.m, staring at the hospital ceiling. "I was just a bank account with legs." "You were a target," I corrected gently. "And that's on him, not you." "How long did you know?" "Suspicions from the start. Proof for about 6 weeks." "Why didn't you tell me?" I squeezed her hand. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have chosen him and cut me out of your life?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I would have chosen him. God, Dad, I would have chosen him." "I know, baby. That's why I had to let him show you himself." Agent Martinez visited the next morning with updates. Derek's real name was Daniel Kowalski, wanted in 3 states for elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. His family fortune was fictional. His associates mostly hired actors or fellow criminals. His entire life a carefully constructed lie, designed to target vulnerable families with assets. "He's looking at 25 to life," Martinez said. "Your evidence is ironclad, Mr. Wakefield. You did one hell of an investigative job." "I had help," I admitted, "and the right motivation." Sarah was released that afternoon. We drove back to the farm in silence, past the remnants of the wedding reception, still scattered across the south meadow. She stared at the collapsed tents and wilted flowers, but said nothing. As we pulled up to the house, she finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Dad. For everything. For not trusting you, for bringing him here, for almost losing everything you and Mom built." "You don't apologize for being targeted by a predator," I said firmly. "You heal, you learn, and you move forward. That's what Wakefields do." "What if I can't? What if I'm too broken?" I turned to face my daughter, seeing not the woman Derek had tried to destroy, but the little girl who'd once brought me injured birds to heal, convinced that love could fix anything. Then we'll rebuild you piece by piece, just like we'll rebuild everything else. And this time, we'll do it together." She cried, then really cried for the first time since the wedding, and I held her in the driveway of our family farm, while the sunset painted the wheat fields gold, and the sirens faded in the distance, carrying Derek Hartwell to face the justice he'd earned. The reversal was complete. The predator had become prey. But our real work, the work of healing and rebuilding, was just beginning. The news of Derek's arrest spread through our farming community like wildfire in dry wheat. By Tuesday morning, reporters had descended on our small town, their satellite trucks clustering around the courthouse where Derek was being held without bail. I kept Sarah away from it all, focusing on her recovery, while Marcus's security team deterred any media that ventured onto our property. The unraveling of Derek Hartwell's fabricated life became a spectacle I hadn't anticipated. Each day brought new revelations, each more shocking than the last. Agent Martinez kept us informed of the major developments, sitting at our kitchen table, with files that grew thicker by the hour. "His mother isn't dead, as he claimed," Martinez announced on the third day. "She's serving 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud. Apparently, the apple didn't fall far from the tree." Sarah winced at each revelation, but she insisted on hearing everything. "I need to know," she said. "I need to understand how I missed it all." "He was a professional," Martinez assured her. "You weren't his first victim, and you wouldn't have been his last if your father hadn't intervened." The hired actors who'd played Derek's wealthy family at the wedding were the first to cooperate fully. Reginald Morse, the man who'd portrayed Derek's uncle, was actually an out-of-work theater actor from Kansas City. "He paid us $500 each to play relatives," Morse testified. "Gave us whole backstories, family histories. I thought it was just some rich guy's eccentric wedding idea until the FBI showed up." But it was Angela Chen's testimony that truly exposed Derek's methods. She flew in from California, a successful restaurateur who'd rebuilt her life after Derek's destruction. In a closed courtroom session that Sarah and I were permitted to attend, Angela laid out Derek's playbook with clinical precision. "He studies his targets for months." Angela explained, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Learns their vulnerabilities, their dreams, their fears. With me, he knew I wanted to prove myself beyond my family's restaurant legacy. He made me believe he could help me expand nationally." "How did he gain your trust so completely?" the prosecutor asked. "Gradual isolation. He'd create conflicts with my family, my friends, always positioning himself as the only one who truly understood me. Then came the pills. Anxiety medication, he said, to help with the stress of expansion. I didn't know he was dosing me with benzodiazepines until after I'd lost everything." Sarah gripped my hand during this testimony, her face pale but determined. When Angela described waking up in a psychiatric facility after Derek had her committed to gain power of attorney, Sarah's breathing became ragged. "I need a moment," she whispered. We stepped outside the courthouse into the bright Nebraska sunshine. Sarah doubled over, hands on her knees, fighting nausea. "He was going to do that to me," she gasped. The comments about my mental state suggesting I was unstable from pregnancy hormones. He was setting the stage. "But he didn't succeed," I reminded her. "You're here. You're free. You're safe." The financial investigation revealed the true scope of Derek's crimes. He targeted 7 farming families across the Midwest over the past 8 years. The Buchanan Ranch in Texas, the Morrison Dairy operation in Iowa, the Peterson Grain Empire in Kansas. Each time he'd identified families with significant landholdings and unmarried daughters. Total estimated theft, $32 million, Agent Martinez reported. Most of it gambled away or spent maintaining his illusion of wealth. We've recovered less than $200,000. The most dramatic revelation came when Patricia Morse's brother Richard testified about his sister's death. He'd spent years investigating, hiring private forensics experts with his own money when local law enforcement dismissed his concerns. The tractor's hydraulic system had been tampered with, Richard stated, producing photographs and expert reports. A small component was removed designed to fail under specific pressure conditions. Derek had been teaching Patricia to operate that exact tractor in the weeks before her death. He knew exactly when and how it would fail. The courtroom erupted. Derek's public defender objected frantically while Derek himself lunged forward screaming denials until bailiffs restrained him. Sarah watched it all with hollow eyes, processing the reality that she'd married a murderer. That evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Sarah had been quiet since the hearing, staring at the fields where she'd once planned to raise her children with Derek. "I lost the baby," she said suddenly. I turned to her, seeing tears streak down her face. "What?" "This morning. The doctors said it was probably inevitable given the drugs and stress. But I can't help thinking." She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself. "Sarah, no, don't you dare blame yourself. He killed our baby dad, just like he killed Patricia. And I brought him here. I let him into our lives." "You loved someone who didn't exist," I said firmly. "Derek Hartwell was a character, a performance. You're mourning someone who was never real." The next weeks brought a parade of Derek's victims to our town. They came to testify, but also to connect with Sarah, to share their experiences and healing. Our kitchen became an impromptu support group, these strong women who'd survived Derek's devastation, finding solace in shared understanding. Margaret Peterson, who'd lost her family's century-old grain operation, spent hours with Sarah discussing the manipulation tactics. "He made me feel like I was going crazy," Margaret said. "Every concern I raised was hormonal or irrational. He had me doubting my own thoughts." "The gaslighting was constant," Angela added. "He'd move things and deny it, tell me I'd agreed to things I'd never heard of. By the end, I didn't trust my own memory." Through these conversations, Sarah began to understand she wasn't weak or foolish. She'd been systematically targeted by a predator who'd honed his skills over years of practice. The trial date was set for spring, but Derek's unraveling accelerated when other inmates learned his history of targeting elderly farmers. His lawyer requested protective custody after the third assault, claiming his client couldn't get a fair trial in rural Nebraska. "He wants a change of venue," Martinez informed us. "Claims local bias." "Let him try," I said. "His crimes cross state lines. This is federal now." The investigation also revealed why Derek had accelerated his timeline with Sarah. His gambling debts had caught up with him. 3 days before our wedding, he'd received a visit from collectors representing a Vegas crime syndicate. Marriage to Sarah and quick access to the farm's value was his last chance to avoid their justice. We found his real apartment in Omaha. Martinez showed us photos of a sparse studio filled with surveillance equipment and files on multiple families. He was researching 3 other potential targets while romancing Sarah. "You were the most valuable, so you got priority." Sarah studied the photos of other young women, other farms, other families who'd narrowly escaped Derek's attention. Her jaw set with new determination. "I want to help with the prosecution," she announced. "Whatever they need. Testimony, evidence, everything." "Sarah, you don't have to put yourself through that." "Yes, I do. For them." She gestured at the photos. "For everyone he hurt, and everyone he might have hurt. I was the last one, Dad. Let me help make sure of that." As winter approached, Derek made one final attempt at manipulation. A letter arrived forwarded through his lawyer, addressed to Sarah. I wanted to burn it, but Sarah insisted on reading it. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "I know you're confused and hurt, but please understand that everything I did was out of love. Your father poisoned you against me, filled your head with lies. The baby we lost was because of his interference, his stress on our perfect union. I forgive you for abandoning me, and when this misunderstanding is resolved, we can start fresh. The farm can still be ours. Our children can still run through those fields. Just tell them you were mistaken. Tell them your father manipulated you. Save us, my love. Save our future." Sarah read it once. then walked to the fireplace and fed it to the flames. He's still trying to manipulate me. Still thinks I'm weak enough to fall for it. You're not weak, I said. You never were. You're a Wakefield. We bend, but we don't break. That night, for the first time since the wedding, Sarah smiled. It was small, tentative, but real. Thank you, Dad. For everything. For seeing what I couldn't. For saving me, even when I didn't know I needed saving. That's what fathers do, I said simply. As the first snow began to fall covering the farm in pristine white, I felt something shift. The danger had passed. The predator was caged. Now came the harder work of rebuilding not just trust and security, but hope itself. And if there was one thing a farmer understood, it was that even the harshest winter eventually gave way to spring. 6 months after Derek's arrest, spring arrived in Nebraska, with its usual promise of renewal. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching Sarah work with a young mare in the training pen. Her movements were confident again, her voice steady as she guided the animal through its paces. The hollow-eyed ghost who'd returned from her honeymoon had slowly transformed back into the daughter I'd raised. The trial had concluded 2 weeks ago. 25 years to life with no possibility of parole for 15. Derek had maintained his innocence to the end, even as witness after witness detailed his crimes. His final statement to the court was a rambling accusation against me, claiming I'd orchestrated everything out of jealousy and greed. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Justice served, Agent Martinez had said, shaking my hand outside the courthouse. Your courage saved lives, Mr. Wakefield. Who knows how many families you protected from future harm? But I hadn't done it for anonymous future victims. I'd done it for the woman now, laughing as the mare nuzzled her pocket for treats, the daughter who'd found her way back to herself through the darkness. A car turned up our drive and I recognized Dr. James Morrison, the local veterinarian who'd taken Sarah back as an associate after her recovery. But it wasn't his truck. This was his personal vehicle, and he was arriving an hour before the clinic opened. Morning, Clinton. James called out, stepping onto the porch. He was young, maybe 32, with the kind of steady demeanor that came from years of calming frightened animals. Sarah invited me for breakfast. Hope that's all right. I'd noticed the growing friendship between them over the past months. James had been patient professional, never pushing beyond what Sarah was ready for. They'd started with coffee after work, progressed to dinner at the local diner, and now, apparently, breakfast at the farm. Always room for one more, I said, meaning it. Coffee's fresh. Sarah joined us 20 minutes later, her cheeks flushed from the morning air. The smile she gave James was different from the practiced one she'd worn with Derek. This was genuine, unguarded, real. Over scrambled eggs and bacon, they discussed plans for a mobile veterinary clinic to serve remote farms. James had the funding. Sarah had the experience and connections. Together, they painted a picture of a business that would help their community while building something meaningful. We could base it here if you're willing, Clinton, James suggested. Convert part of the north barn. Keep overhead low while we get established. Sounds practical. I agreed, watching Sarah's eyes light up with possibility. After James left for the clinic, Sarah and I walked through the fields where winter wheat was just beginning to green. She'd taken to joining me on these morning walks, finding peace in the routine that had structured my life for decades. I testified at a victim impact panel yesterday, she said quietly. For people recovering from relationship abuse, shared my story. How did it go? Hard, but good. There was a young woman there reminded me of myself a year ago. So certain her situation was different that her abuser really loved her. I saw myself in her denial. Did you help her? Sarah smiled softly. I told her my story. Gave her my number. Maybe she'll call, maybe she won't. But she knows she's not alone. This had become Sarah's mission, speaking at support groups, working with prosecutors on similar cases, helping other victims recognize the signs she'd missed. The local women's shelter had asked her to join their board, and she'd accepted. I got a letter yesterday, she continued. From Angela Chen. She's opening a new restaurant, wants to call it Second Chances. She asked if she could use part of our story in her marketing about surviving and rebuilding. What did you tell her? That survival stories need to be shared. That silence only protects the predators. We reached the oak tree where I'd proposed to Sarah's mother 40 years ago. Sarah paused, running her hand over the ancient bark. I'm pregnant, she said softly. I turned to stare at her, seeing the mix of joy and fear in her eyes. James, I asked, though I knew the answer. No, Dad. This is from before. I didn't lose the baby after all. The doctors were wrong, or maybe I'm just more stubborn than they thought. She took a shaky breath. I'm scared. What if Derek tries to claim rights from prison? What if the drugs affected development? What if I'm not ready to do this alone? First, I said firmly, you're not alone. You'll never be alone. Second, Derek signed away any parental rights as part of his plea deal. Martinez made sure of that. And third, that baby is half Wakefield. We're fighters. What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I can't protect my child the way you protected me? I pulled my daughter into a hug, feeling her tears soak into my shirt. You'll love that baby with everything you have. You'll make mistakes just like I did. But you'll learn, adapt, and do better. That's what parents do. Over the following weeks, the farm transformed with new purpose. The mobile veterinary clinic took shape in the North Barn. Sarah's pregnancy progressed normally, each ultrasound showing a healthy, active baby. James remained a steady, undemanding presence, making it clear he was there for whatever Sarah needed, whether as a friend, business partner, or perhaps someday something more. The women from Derek's victim support group organized a baby shower that was everything the wedding hadn't been: genuine, warm, and filled with people who truly cared about Sarah's well-being. Margaret Peterson drove 300 miles to attend, bringing a handmade quilt passed down through her family. For new beginnings, she said simply. One evening, as summer heat gave way to autumn cool, I found Sarah on the porch, her hand resting on her expanding belly. She was reading something on her tablet, her expression thoughtful. What's got your attention? An article about agricultural innovation. Some of Derek's ideas about modernizing farm operations weren't wrong, just his motivations. I'm wondering if we could implement sustainable improvements, honor the land, while making it more profitable. Sounds like you're thinking beyond the mobile clinic. Maybe. James and I have been discussing it. Traditional farming with modern efficiency. Veterinary services combined with agricultural consulting. Building something Derek could never understand: a legacy based on honest work and community service. 3 weeks before her due date, Sarah went into labor during a thunderstorm that reminded me of the night she was born. James drove while I kept Sarah calm, the same words I'd whispered to her mother flowing naturally. Breathe, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know. 8 hours later, Thomas William Morrison entered the world screaming with healthy lungs and waving tiny fists like a boxer. Sarah cried as they placed him on her chest, this perfect new life, untouched by the darkness that had preceded him. He's beautiful, James whispered, and I saw in his eyes the same protective love I'd felt the first time I held Sarah. Want to hold your grandson? Sarah asked me, and I took little Thomas with hands that had delivered calves and foals, but still trembled at this miracle. Hey there, little farmer, I whispered. Welcome to the family business. The christening took place in the same church where Sarah's disastrous wedding had occurred. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony with joy, erasing the shadow of that previous day. The community packed the pews, celebrating new life and new hope. During the reception at the farm, held under simple canopies with homemade food and genuine laughter, I gave a toast. A year ago, we thought we were celebrating a union, but we were really witnessing a deception. Today, we celebrate truth. The truth of family, community, and resilience. The truth that love isn't shown in grand gestures or expensive gifts, but in patience, protection, and the courage to stand against those who would harm the innocent. I raised my glass to Sarah, who stood holding Thomas James beside her, with his hand gentle on her back. To my daughter, who found strength in her darkest hour. To my grandson, who will grow up on land that's been cherished for generations. And to the future, which belongs not to those who take, but to those who tend, who heal, and who build. The applause was warm and sincere, so different from the hollow performance of Derek's reception. As the sun set over the wheat fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I watched Sarah introduce Thomas to the land that would be his inheritance. Not just acres and equipment, but values and wisdom passed down through generations. James approached me as the evening wound down. "Clinton, I want you to know my intentions toward Sarah are serious, but I understand she needs time. I'm not going anywhere." "Good," I said simply, "because neither are we." Later, after the guests had gone, and Thomas was sleeping peacefully in the nursery we'd created in Sarah's old room, my daughter and I sat on the porch one last time. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, "for everything. For seeing what I couldn't. For having the courage to let me fall so I could learn to stand. For showing me that real love doesn't demand or manipulate. It protects and empowers." "You would have done the same for me," I replied. "I hope I'm half the parent you are." "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." As the stars emerged in the clear Nebraska sky, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. Derek Hartwell had entered our lives like a plague, threatening to destroy everything we'd built. But in the end, he'd only revealed the strength that was always there in the land and the community, and most of all in the bonds between a father and daughter that no con man could break. The farm would continue passed down, not through manipulation or theft, but through love and honest work. Thomas would grow up here learning to read the weather and tend the soil. Sarah would heal other animals and help other victims. James would prove himself worthy of the trust Sarah was slowly learning to give again. And I would watch it all from this porch guardian of a legacy that Derek had tried to steal, but had only made stronger. Because that's what farmers do. We plant, we tend, we weather the storms, and we trust in the promise of next season's harvest. Sometimes the greatest love a parent can show is having the courage to stand firm against those who would harm their children even when that child can't see the danger. True strength isn't in the fist, but in the patience to let truth reveal itself. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ending is even better than the beginning. As Sarah headed inside to check on Thomas, she paused at the door. "Same time tomorrow for our walk." "Wouldn't miss it," I promised. And I meant it. Every sunrise, every season, every moment of this new beginning was a gift Derek had tried to steal, but had only made more precious. The farm endured, the family endured, and in the end, that's all that really mattered. To everyone reading this, I want to ask you, have you ever had to protect someone you love from a danger they couldn't see? How did you find the strength to do what was necessary, even when it meant letting them stumble first? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart or reminded you of the importance of staying vigilant against those who would prey on trust, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone, that survival is possible, and that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the strongest victories. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May you always have the wisdom to see through deception, the courage to stand against manipulation, and the love to protect those who matter most. Until next time, remember, true wealth isn't measured in acres or bank accounts, but in the bonds we forge and the legacies we leave. God bless.